Oh, man. I've been listening to maybe the best thing to come out of Canada lately, and it's not.
I already know what you're going to say.
It's not.
CCO Nation.
Well, yes, actually. I've been listening to a lot of CCO. I was going to say it's not recordings of your voice, which I have been listening to. And I've been listening to a lot of Commander Cookout. But no, I was listening to a lot of Bare Naked Ladies today. It was great.
Oh, nice.
It's just, it's getting to be spring out, I say, as we are faced with an impending snowstorm tomorrow night.
Right.
Just to date this episode.
Just to push the whole Canada, the whole Canada content.
Yeah, right? The Great White. It was interesting, too. I was watching somebody... There's so many people out there from Canada. Did you know? I was watching somebody on Twitch the other day, and I was like, oh, they're from Canada. And then I watch a lot of Loading Ready Run as well. Sure. They're from Canada.
Two of them are actually from my hometown.
Wow.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Commander podcasts from Canada as well. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Or not even just Commander.
Yeah.
I guess Magic podcasts in general.
Yeah.
I know the Spike Feeders are from Canada.
Spike Feeders out of Winnipeg. That's where I went to law school.
Couldn't tell you where that is. Sorry.
Yeah. Most people who don't live in Canada or Minnesota would not be able to tell you where Winnipeg is.
I was gonna say is Winnipeg in like the middle of the country, and apparently, if you're comparing it to Minnesota, yes,
smack dab.
All of this to say, nothing to do with the episode. I was.
What are you talking about? The episode is about upgrades.
Being
Canadian is just a straight upgrade.
2 questions.
Yeah.
1, can you adopt me? Second question, before you even answer, can we move back to Canada?
I don't know if I can adopt you, but we can see what we can do about the citizenship.
But no, I was listening to some Commander Cookout, and I was like, oh man, just the beginning of that episode, just so sweet, so succinct, so to the point, and now I'm dragging it out.
There you
because energy. Let me sip on my coffee while we throw it to our theme song. You wanna do the Brando? Hit our theme song. Welcome to Temple of Falspot, where decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
Today we're talking about upgrades, as you probably heard. We're deep into our 6th season, and this season, because it's the 6th season, we wanted to talk a lot about 60 card decks. But I feel like this topic, of all the topics this season, is very honed. I mean, not honed. The opposite. Broad enough that it of all the episodes, this is the one that is EDH relevant as well. I mean, all of them have been,
right?
Except for maybe the cat episode. But
we're talking about upgrades, and I mean that is just as valid for virtually any casual deck. So whether you're playing 60 card, whether you're playing Commander, or any other format in between, the upgrades are something that either happen for you all the time, or at least for some people, don't happen at all.
We're coming into the next deck tale, where I'll be presenting a brand new 60 card deck that has never been talked about before on this show. Well, except for the past couple episodes. Anyway, I've played a few games with it, and I've been taking cards in and out, and I figured this would be a great way to focus in on that and really think about what are decks doing here. So the way I see it, there's a handful of reasons you would upgrade a deck. I have 3 written. We may come across more. The first and most obvious is that the deck isn't doing exactly what you want it to do. Whether it's because it doesn't have enough of that engine that you want get going, or you aren't protecting yourself enough. So then you die before you ever get to your destination.
The deck doesn't do.
It don't do deck.
Don't do
deck. Which, I mean, we've all been there. You get focused in on either trying to make it more well-rounded or too focused in on X, and it becomes one-dimensional. How do you know? How do you know when your deck is that way?
Okay, so the difficulty for me with this is that I play once a week.
Oh yeah.
So if you figure that I'm playing, say, 3 games a week, and I have 16 commander decks and another 16 60-card decks.
And that's a lucky week to get 3 games in.
It is. But it means that, like, I'm not, unless there's something very obviously wrong with the deck. Like, I have made a fundamental error when building, and that has happened, where you play 1 game and it becomes evident that there is a serious flaw. Then yeah, I'm looking at upgrade. However, I would almost suggest that's not really even an upgrade at that point, because at that point that's a rebuild.
Right.
You know, I'm going to take that deck after the game. I'm going to spread it out on the table, sort it according to where it need, you know, each of the categories that I had listed, figure out what I'm missing, and fix that.
Yeah.
So that's less of an upgrade and a lot more of a rebuild. But I
would argue that they are, you know, one and the same, especially in this case where, I mean, if you're dealing with a 60-card deck, every card difference is a higher percentage than if you're dealing with a 100-card deck.
Right.
So the more cards you change, the higher percentage you're changing it. The thing I think of when I'm like, oh, like, what do I need to change about this deck? And like, why isn't it doing X? Why isn't it doing deck? I heard it when I said it, and I'm gonna keep it.
Okay. We're gonna run with that.
It's gonna do deck. So if the deck's like really not doing deck, and like you can tell from one play, then yeah, I mean, it's going to be a higher percentage regardless of if you are playing a 60 or 100. Right. And for it to be a one game thing, it's got to be real bad.
Yeah.
But I think with 60 card decks, I feel like it's a little bit more nuanced than 100 card decks.
Yes and no. A lot of times I find with 60 card decks, at least some of them, there's very much a singular focus. Mm-hmm. You want to do this thing, and that's the thing that the deck does. And it's not a case of, oh, I forgot to put in removal. It's a case of, no, this deck does the thing. Mm-hmm. We don't do the removal. We do the thing. So as long as the deck does the thing, then the fact that, you know, you got blown out last game because you weren't able to stop whatever it was that they were doing, or they did it faster, or something happened, and it just, you know, your deck couldn't respond to their deck, but your deck wasn't built to respond to their deck because it's 60 cards and it does the thing.
Right.
Then you can change your deck. You can upgrade to make that work, but in doing so, you're really taking away from the thing. So for decks that are that focused, you really are just looking at, okay, so if that blows me out, how can I make doing the thing more effective, whether it's faster or bigger? And you focus on your theme even more.
Yeah.
So, but that becomes obvious. I find that becomes obvious faster. I think with some of the 60 card decks that I run, you understand when it needs the upgrade quickly.
Yeah.
The joy, and I guess the difficulty with a commander deck is the deck does play differently every time. So if I get blown out and I say, boy, you know, I think I need more card draw. Mm-hmm. If I had more card draw, I wouldn't have got blown out.
It's usually my issue.
Right, but then I go back into the deck and I say, but I think I have enough card draw. So did I just not draw enough for that game? In other words, is my sample size too small?
Right.
And with Commander, and especially, as I just said, I've got 16 decks and I just don't get around to playing them all that often. A lot of times, the sample size is too small, but you're just going to have to run with that. It's like, okay, so do I feel like that's not enough? So it becomes a situation where you feel like where you're running on feel.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because we've kind of alluded to this, but it is impossible to tell after one game. Unless you know that you built it wrong.
Right.
And that's only because you shuffle a deck, X amount of times, it's going to have infinite possibilities. I'm exaggerating, obviously. But the game is about statistical chance of drawing X card. And there is never a 100% possibility that you will always draw the amount of lands you need, the card that you need at the right time.
Right. There's always going to be something you get too much of and something you don't get enough of. It's just a matter of trying to figure out when that's
happening too often.
Right. So, you take a look at it and look back at what you've got and say to yourself, okay, I have this many ways to do what I'm trying to do. Is that enough? Did I just get hosed this game?
Right.
And I just need to shuffle up and play the next game and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or do I genuinely need to upgrade that particular slot?
Yeah. And I think too, I bought both of the Crimson Vow Commander decks. I've yet to play the Rakdos one, but the Azorius one, the Azorius Spirits. It is very solid. It does a thing very well. I've played it once, and knowing generally how these decks are built,
right,
they do fine. They have the things that you need in a fair amount. The structure of it is exactly what you'd want for the price point. And I came out of the gates swinging. I had a god draw, and I was like, you know what? It's early game. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the thing. I think I had 30 spirits out in turn 5 or 6, and somebody wrapped the board. And by that point, I had 2 cards in hand. They were both lands, and I could not come back from it. I mean, that commander, she costs less with reference to how many spirits you control on board. So if all of your spirit tokens are gone and never coming back, then after the third time that you've played her, she already costs 7. So she's going to cost 13 or so. And it's easy the first 2 times when you have those spirits on board and people are using direct targeted removal.
Right.
All of this to say, just because I have 2 lands and the next 6 turns I'm just drawing, things that aren't helping me build my board back, doesn't mean that deck isn't built improperly. Doesn't mean that deck doesn't work. It did its thing. I overextended my board. Somebody wrathed the board, and I didn't draw into a way to rebuild it. I played it once, so I have no idea if that's the norm. I don't know if it's just the way that I played it. If I had, held back a little, maybe somebody would have waited a couple more turns to rat the board. There's so many. I'm gesturing wildly with my hands. There's so many variables that you could take into account, and obviously one of them is the way you play. And yes, the way you play should impact the card choices for each slot. But I think overall, the other decks that you play against are important. And so just because your deck didn't do didn't do deck once doesn't mean that it's not going to do deck every time.
Right. Something else to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned the precon.
Yeah.
And the first thing that popped into my head was there are so many easy ways to do a quick upgrade on the precon.
Yeah.
The trick is, should you with the precon, because so much of the upgrade, or whether or not you're going to upgrade, is going to be dependent on your playgroup. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a handful of decks that could be upgraded. I mean, most of my decks could be upgraded, but there's no reason to yet.
Right.
So,
and I think, like, even beyond that, like, you know, using precon still as the example.
Yeah.
They've just been getting more powerful, generally more efficient, as the format has been leaning toward,
right.
As time goes on. Obviously, you know, the land base is suboptimal, mm-hmm. But generally they do some wild things,
right?
Because,
well, like for our group,
mm-hmm.
An unaltered precon easily holds its own with our group.
Oh, absolutely.
That's generally where our power level is. And so if I was to make any changes to that deck, it's probably just going to be the land.
Yeah.
The land, maybe there's a couple of cards that would, you know, improve the draws or improve the, you know, improve the ramp, but
yeah,
for the most part, that's it. I'm not looking to improve what the deck actually does.
And I think that brings us beautifully into my second point of, sometimes the deck does things that you don't want it to do. For instance, kind of sticking to precons, we both have played the red-white Osgear deck.
Yeah.
That thing's a beast.
Yeah.
That thing's a powerhouse. And our meta doesn't generally deal with a lot of graveyard hate. I think that overall in Commander, it is a thing that people are talking more and more about, so I think it will make its way through, kind of like with the past couple of years with enchantment removal. Mm-hmm. So Osgear is kind of based around this idea of taking things out of your graveyard, especially artifacts, which another thing that our meta doesn't generally deal well with is artifact removal. So those two things, obviously the deck isn't a great fit for our meta, but it is a blast to play.
Yeah.
You play it again and again and again, people are gonna start to, you know, focus on you turn one. And that is the next point of like it is too powerful for a meta, a certain meta. Mm-hmm. It is kind of pushing the boundaries for our meta. Sometimes I know that there are some people in our play group that have stronger decks just based on how they build.
Yeah.
And so like sometimes it is nice to have that, but with the Osgear precon specifically, to make upgrades to that may be to like change out some of the artifacts that you're pulling out of the graveyard. You know, we've got a triplicate Titan where it, like, when it dies you get 3/3/3s.
Right.
And to recur that again and again and again is pulling a 9/9 out of the graveyard, and then it leaves 3/3/3s behind. That's a lot. Maybe you can bring it down to Meteor Golem or something. Like there's options.
You just shrink it down to Wormcoil.
Oh yeah. You know, something less offensive. You know, there's no black. Wait, is Wormcoil Engine black? No.
Just feels that way,
right? It's the Death Touch. But like I'm circling around the point that I've already made, and I don't know where to go beyond it. But it is that sometimes your deck is just too powerful for yourself, and it paints a target on you too quickly. So to upgrade it is to downgrade it, right?
I tend to look at decks that that play like that where they come out gangbusters. Once I've played it once and recognized that that's kind of how it runs, then I tend to let it go and rein it in much earlier than I would otherwise. Mm-hmm. Sort of, okay, I've got 2 more cards that I should be following up on this, because that would just take things off to, into the next level. But I don't do it because I'm counting on, or I'm expecting that I'm already going to be leaning towards being the target of the table. So why play the cards, get hammered, and essentially be throwing those cards away when I can hold them in my hand, have enough of a threat on the board that people still have to deal with it, but I'm also not seen as the only threat on the board. Let them deal with what's there, knowing I've got something in reserve, and then I can follow it up. So that becomes more of an upgrade to my play style as opposed to an upgrade to the deck itself. So
yeah, and I think that there's so much yeah. to think about when taking your deck to the next step. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, the first time you play it, it's going to be either you've been building solid decks for years and you know that it can carry itself for the next couple of years until you disassemble it, or you're just like everybody else and fine at building decks and you need to make some upgrades, whether your meta has changed or whether it just wasn't good to begin with. Right. Or like I said, maybe it was too good. But all of that said, we need to take a break.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll have our thoughts on, the things we've touched on, and some new things. So we'll be right back. Go take it away, ad reader Andy. This Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by cracking booster of Commander Legends and pulling that sweet duel that you've always wanted for your deck but could never shell out the money for, so you bought a box for $120 instead of just the land itself.
This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you This episode of Temple of the False God Upgrades. This episode of Temple of the False Pod is in desperate need of an upgrade. To me. Back to you, Andy.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Thanks, ad readers Andy and Bruce.
Hey.
You did such a good job. You deserve a gold star. Both of you. Where were we? We're talking about upgrades, of course. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about 2 reasons why we would want an upgrade. 1, your deck is not doing deck. And 2, your deck is doing a different deck. Things that you don't want it to do. So whether it's too powerful for your meta, or just generally it's doing a thing that you didn't realize it could do, and you're like, I don't want that to happen. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I'm just thinking of the color blue, but, I'm sure it fits in there somewhere. There are a few other reasons that you'd want an upgrade or a downgrade, and the first thing that I can think of is new tech. So like new cards, new mechanics. Maybe you're like, this mechanic would work really well in this deck.
I mean, for me, Grenzo and Bruticlad are the 2 most obvious examples in my decks. Mm-hmm. Buzzbark as well to some extent. But whenever there is a card that references the bottom of the library, I'm immediately looking at it to determine how that's going to work. So it's, with the recent release of Neon Dynasty, we've got an upgrade for Grenzo. It's Rado's Sentinel. Essentially, take your Rito Lantern and make it a creature.
Give it some legs.
Give it some legs.
3/3 legs.
Yeah, it's a 3/3 for 3 mana with Defender. So don't get too crazy. But when Rito Sentinel enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards. Now, that's really neither here nor there. I have a number of ways to take cards from my graveyard, put them onto the bottom of the library. So that's I'm likely going to be targeting myself in this situation. However, it also says for 3, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. So you see where the mill and everything else all works real well with the Sentinel.
And if you have no idea what we're talking about with Grenzo, feel free to go back. We have an episode, a deck tale, about Grenzo, and it's maybe the best because Grenzo's the best.
Just for a quick understanding, Grenzo basically takes cards from the bottom of your library and puts them into play if they're creatures. This is where the Rito Sentinel is an upgrade over the Rito Lantern, because the Lantern is not a creature. So if you flip the Lantern off the bottom of your deck, it just goes to your library and sits there. Or it goes to your graveyard and sits there. If you flip the Sentinel, well, it stays in play. Yeah. So, and that is a significant upgrade for the deck. But this is, again, it just adds another card that fits the theme.
Right.
And, I mean, yes, you want to be careful you don't go too crazy with that. But at the same time, this is just a perfect fit.
Right.
It just slots in very nicely. I don't know that it really changes the power level of the deck. Maybe a little bit better, but
I think it makes it more consistent. Sure. And I think too, like the nice thing with this too is like it even gets in the niche of the fact that your Grenzo deck looks for creatures power 3 or less.
Yeah.
And it's power 3 or less.
Right.
And I think beyond that too, like it's nice because it's got Defender. So like nobody's generally super threatened by it.
No, there's always going to be other creatures that people want to get rid of.
And I think it then begs the question of, all right, you're making these upgrades. Are you taking out the thing it's with this specifically, are you taking out Rito Lantern? Or are you putting it beside it? Are you taking something else out that isn't seem to be working?
Right. And for me, I'm going to look at all of the cards that I have in the deck that put cards from the graveyard to the bottom of the library and pick the one that I don't think is working the best.
Right.
I do think that I've reached a point with the deck where I've got enough of those cards in the deck, so I don't think I need to add another one.
Yeah.
So I am going to be looking to replace something, a card that has that same effect, but maybe just isn't as good.
Yeah.
Now maybe that is the Lantern. I haven't looked through to figure out if it is or not, but something along that line will be coming out.
Yeah, that's like a nice intersection too of not only are you upgrading it for new tech, but you're also upgrading it like you're understanding the intersection of that and is the deck too focused on this one thing. So for instance, that this deck has plenty of take from graveyard or battlefield, put it on bottom of library. That it has that plenty over. So that it doesn't need to replace something else to make that slot if we're looking at the 9x7, the effect, you don't need to expand more, you just need to upgrade.
Yeah, well, I feel like especially for that case, that deck has reached the point where I have that locked down. Where if I see a card come up, a creature that has a power of 3 or less, that fits, that's black and or red or colorless. So in other words, it could go in the deck. I take a look at it and compare it to the other cards that are the splash, the splashy part of the deck, and decide if that should take that slot. But I'm rare. The deck has reached a point where I'm not going to put the Sentinel in and take something splashy out. because I don't think I have enough of that effect. I feel like I do. That deck doesn't need that kind of alteration. Now, other decks, the upgrade is different. Like I mentioned, Bruticlad. That deck, I think I'm getting pretty close to where, I mean, the deck wants to have a certain number of cards that make a lot of tokens. The deck wants to have a certain number of cards that make big token creatures, or at least figure out a way to do that. I haven't quite locked in on what the correct number is for either of those. So if I find a card that I think should go in the deck, I may very well pull something out that does the opposite. So if I find something that can make, a copy of an opponent's creature and make it a token creature, I may add that and pull out something that makes, I don't know, a dozen treasures or something like that.
Right. And I think too with that, like it's an interesting point where it's like, obviously all of these examples are deck specific.
Right.
And it is about knowing your deck intimately, because not only did you build it, and like even if you net decked, I think that like there is a point where like sure, every deck could use an upgrade to an extent, and I mean it comes to the point of like, where do you want to stop? And I think that that's a question you'll have to answer yourself, because like with Bruticlad, you're reaching a point where you'll see a card every 2 years or so where it's like, okay, this needs to be in the deck.
Right.
But beyond that, like the deck runs.
Yeah.
You don't need to make an upgrade literally ever again, because it is exactly where you want it.
Right. I think that's kind of a big point.
Yeah.
We're talking about upgrades, but just remember, every upgrade you make, like I'm talking about upgrading Rito to Rito Sentinel. This is a small upgrade, but every upgrade is an improvement.
Yeah.
At least it should be. I mean, you hope it will be in the long run. It may be that you found a card you think is better, you include it as your upgrade, and then later you find out, no, it's not working the way I wanted it to, or you were trying it and it just didn't pan out the way you thought. But if every card you put in makes your deck just a little bit better, at some point you have to stop and say, well, am I really trying to make it a little bit better?
Right.
Then you start looking at cards that are going to, your upgrades at that point stop being about making the deck better and start being, okay, does this improve my theme?
Right.
Like I've got a handful of cards I've just ordered for the Cats and Rats deck we just talked about in the a few podcasts ago. And basically all that's happening is that I found cats that are doing things that I had other cards doing.
Right.
So why not add the cats? Maybe I'll find that I've got too many and it's overwhelming the deck, but
it's making my allergies act up.
Right. But as far as,
don't tell Frankie.
I'm not looking to do it to upgrade the power level. I'm doing it to upgrade the theme.
Right.
Hey, cats.
Right. And I mean, like, I think that touches a little bit on the point I made earlier of like sometimes you got to downgrade the deck for your meta. And
right.
Like, I think that you keep fiddling with the deck, and sure, like it'll go up and down in power level. And I think that the thing you want to focus on is like not necessarily like you're saying it makes the deck better, which is absolutely true.
Right.
Because what we're saying is it's not making it more competitive. It's not making it more honed. None of that. It's making it better because it is making your experience with the deck and the table's experience a better experience, because either you're having more fun or the table's having more fun.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's this you're making the deck do deck.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing. I think that a lot of people gloss over that, where it's like, all right, like I got to just keep honing in on like, I got to put Jewel Lotus in here because it's
right, because it's the
croned.
Next best thing. Or I need a Mana Crypt in here because that's better ramp than the worst piece of artifact ramp that I have in the deck.
Yeah.
Go down that route if you want. That's, I would, take a long look at your meta and determine if that's something that your meta can tolerate. Because you do not want to create an arms race in your group, because then it turns into an imbalance.
Yeah.
And it just makes the decks, it makes games much harder to deal with. But I mean, there's nothing saying that Nicer Lands isn't an upgrade. Just simply, swapping out your basics for a nicer basic is still an upgrade to the deck.
Swapping out your guild gates for even the ones that just, they come in, you gain a life. Like,
sure.
They're small things that end up making the game more of a game than, a mission to be the first one done. I think that that succinctly gets to my final point of, I guess two things. One, we've talked about this plenty of times this episode.
Yeah.
Don't just tinker and tinker and tinker, because then you never know if the deck is doing, like, you have no grasp on what the deck's doing. So, like, play a bunch of games with the deck before you make any changes. Yeah. Unless you know for certain that is not doing the thing because you built it wrong. Let it settle. Shuffle up, play. Shuffle up, play. Shuffle up, play. And obviously, you and I, we average a game and a half per week. I say a game and a half because last week we had a single game that lasted 4 hours. That may not be your meta out there, but we had a blast for the most part.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We sit around, we eat pizza, we play Magic. Now, it is hard to sit there and look at that deck sitting on the shelf being like, I just want to change this thing or this thing or this thing.
Yeah.
And maybe you're just waiting on cards from in the mail to put in.
Yep.
Then, yeah, sure, put those in. But to just change a card or two out here and there between each single game is too much. But I think that lends itself to what we've also been saying all along, is that if you don't need to change your deck, don't change it. If it is doing exactly what you want it to do, if it is playing nicely with the table, if you are enjoying the play experience of playing that deck within your play group or wherever you normally play it, keep it as it is. You don't need to have this anxiety about, oh God, there's a new set, I gotta figure out what cards from it I gotta put in. It leads to burnout, honestly, which is a weird thing to say about building decks. But, like, I know plenty of people who have a dozen decks. I have probably coming up on a dozen decks. And to just keep that in mind at all times is hard. To think about, there's this new sword that came out in Eldraine, and, I just bought 2 Embercleaves, finally.
Yeah.
But, like, to constantly be, like, finding those, like, specific cards, whether it's, Radio Sentinel, or, like, you could have just as easily not seen it at all. And, well, sometimes that's okay. Like, if your deck is having issues, then upgrade.
Right.
If it's not,
well,
consider leaving it alone.
I built Nissa Vastwood Seer back when Nissa Vastwood Seer came out. I think it was within a year of it having come out.
Came out in Origins?
Yeah.
I don't know what
I think
year that
I think
is,
I may have made 2 upgrades since then. I would argue that at this point, the deck probably could use a freshening up. But it still runs just fine.
Yeah.
It still sets up nicely. It does what the deck does, and it can manage other things reasonably well. And for our meta, it's still plenty good.
Oh yeah.
So that's a deck that hasn't seen that really. There's no reason to upgrade this deck other than, I want to mess with it or swap something out with something else just so that it's a new card. But I'm not really upping the power level at all. Yeah. So,
for the longest time, one of my first decks, I think it was my second deck, was Drana, Liberator of Malakir.
Yeah.
It was my mono black vampires deck. That's all it did.
Yeah.
It put out vampires, which put out more vampires, and I would gain a bunch of life and put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on things. And that was the gist of the deck.
Right.
And I didn't change it for the longest time. I maybe, like, whenever, like, I found, like, a random black card here and there, like, if I had it, I'd throw it in. Didn't really think too much about the upgrading thing. And for the most part, that deck stayed the same throughout its lifetime. Because every once in a while, I'd go back to it, and I'd have a blast playing it.
Right.
And then Crimson Vow came out, and I was like, all right, there's a lot of vampires here. I should probably consider Drana. But then I realized at that point, I hadn't played Drana in maybe a year. So I was like, you know what? I'll take it apart. I'll have the list somewhere. I think I have it on Architect somewhere. I'll take it apart. I'll put the cards back into my collection. Or I'll build another mono black deck. I'll play that for a bit, see how I'm doing there, and then upgrade that maybe here and there. But for the most part, like, that deck is no longer, because I wasn't having fun with it, and it was more than just a few cards.
Right.
It was just, it was never the thing that I was pulling out of my bag.
Yeah.
And I think that is, yeah. I mean,
it just wasn't your bag anymore?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's always so deck specific, you know? It's like the deck either does a thing for the longest time, and then you become dissatisfied with it, so you take it apart, or you upgrade.
Yeah.
But I think that learning to just play with it, let it do deck, as long as it's doing deck, I think that, like, you don't, like, if you're looking for reasons to upgrade it, then maybe let it settle for a bit. That's all we're saying. Anything else?
I'm just saying that if anybody's playing the drinking game with and using sexual innuendo, I want to apologize right now, because I know that you can't hear us anymore.
I'm gonna bring it back full circle and
right.
Don't Google that. Anyway, believe it or not, we're Temple of False Pod. We're decks not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
Go play with your decks.
Keep it going.
And may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!